Alright guys and gals, so this is part 4 in my series of battling my spine disorders, and this entire video is my mobility work. As I mentioned in the last video, this is my foundational exercise, the goblet squat. I do this exercise for a few seconds all the time. Several times a day I get into this goblet squat position and pry my knees apart. These are clips from the last video I did where I was kind of showing the instruction of how to do the goblet squat, descend down into the squat, maintain that lumbar lordosis, keep the lats tight, place the elbows inside of the knees, and just pry those hips apart. Pry those hips open, stretching those adductor muscles. Here it is from the front. Again, maintain that lordosis. Keep the back straight, not vertical, but straight. Place the knees inside of the elbows and pry those knees apart. Now, these are my bread and butter movements. I don't do all of these movements I'm going to show you all the time, but these first three I do before every single workout, whether it's upper or lower. This is after I do the goblet squat, I proceed to these. These are called fire hydrants. You're down on all fours, keeping the lumbar arch maintained by tensing the lats and the erector muscles, and then just making big circles with the hips. Usually I do 5 forward and I do 5 backward. I repeat as I need to. Get a good amount of blood moving. Get a burn in that butt, and hips and thighs. Fire hydrants is what these are called. Big circles. Get those hips moving. There's my goblet squat again, as always. And then I move on to my next warm-up exercise. As many of you may or may not know, I am an RKC, been certified 3 separate times, and the kettlebell swing. This is my favorite warm-up exercise. I do this all the time. This is actually a very old clip. This is after my first certification in 2008. And one of the reasons I wanted to throw this one in there is that my swing technique has improved quite a bit as my hip mobility has gotten better. My swings are a lot faster, especially down at the bottom. And I'm a little bit more in a deadlift position. Here I'm a little more squatty than deadlifty. Lots and lots of kettlebell swings though as I warm up. Now, after I get, my bread and butter exercise out of the way, I start to do some sort of a squat, especially on my lower days when I'm going to be squatting anyway. These here, I did an overhead squat. Usually I'll do several. They vary, but I like to test things out. Do I have the butt wink going on where my butt drops? Are my knees going in? Is stuff feeling tight? Then I'll diagnose and kind of start using my more accessory mobility work. If I get the butt wink going on, it means my hamstrings are tight. I do this movement here. This is called the Bootstrapper squat. I learned this from Dan John at my first RKC certification. You descend into the goblet squat. You've got the kettlebell there. It works as a lever, and what you're doing is as you let the kettlebell drop, you keep your back straight and arched, and you let your butt come up and stretch the hamstrings. Those are the tight muscles that usually will cause the butt wink. Let that lever drop, the butt comes up, keep the back arch, stretch the hamstrings. Again, the lever drops, the butt comes up, stretch the hamstrings, use the hamstrings, pull back down. And then, this is for my adductors and to test out my hip flexors. If my anterior hip flexors feel tight, I like to test things out. I get into a bench press position, arch the back, chest high, and then I'm just going to grab my sweats here and I'm going to pull my hips apart. Basically as hard as I can, pull and get those things loosened up. A lot of people don't realize that when you're doing a bench press, you should be keeping your back arched. And if you're feeling back pain, it's not your back that's the problem. It's that your anterior hip flexors are the antagonist to your erector muscles in your low back. They're tight. And in order to comfortably arch your back so that you don't feel back pain, you need to stretch out your adductors and your anterior hip flexors. Now, this is a better way to do that move. If you've got a partner, in this case here my son Xander, he is pushing my knees open. Now here I'm trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and I'm warming my shoulders up with some light weight. So kind of try to bear with me on that. But right here I've got my back arched, the erectors are tensed, and Xander is actually pushing my knees apart and pushing my hips open as I'm trying to just basically relax those adductors and then open those hips up. If my back's still sore though, this is how I fix it.
For stretching out that psoas muscle and the anterior hip flexors here is this stretch that I call the genuflex stretch. Some people call it the lunge stretch. I'm Catholic, so I call it the genuflex stretch. And so you get into a kind of a lunge position or a genuflex position, and once you're here, your focus is to stretch this way, not this way. A lot of people may feel it in this hip, but your focus is here. And so once you're in this stretch, you want to keep your shoulders facing forward, and you want to basically maintain the lumbar arch. Without making that arch any greater, the only thing that has to happen is to bring your entire body forward, keeping the hips and shoulders square and facing forward until you feel that stretch all through here. People will have a tendency to do this because this is tight, and so you have to kind of overcompensate and go like that. When you come out of this stretch, it's best to squeeze the glute and then pull your body back as if you're bringing your leg forward. And so here's what it looks like from the other side. Again, everything stays square, lumbar arch is maintained. Just simply bring the hips forward until you feel the stretch. Hold, squeeze the glute, pull back. And it's pretty much as simple as that.
Now, as I'm doing my squats, whether it's an overhead squat, light, back squats, front squats, goblet squats, whatever, say that I'm feeling pain in my knees. That for me, and oftentimes for a lot of people, is a problem with the more distal joint, and in this case, the ankle. Here what I'm doing is basically I'm kind of in that lunge stretch with my body a little bit more forward, but I'm grabbing my foot and I am holding it flat on the floor. And then using the abductor muscles, I'm pulling my knee out. It's very subtle. So you can see I'm pulling it out there and keeping my foot pushed down, holding it flat to the floor as I'm working on that ankle mobility and trying to get those ankles more mobile. A lot of times that is the issue, not the joint that's the problem, but the distal joint. And then if my muscles are just not firing, if I'm not feeling explosive, I'll kind of incorporate a few things together. This here is just your basic mountain climber. My variation to it is I like to try to pause for just a split second and right there and stretch out my anterior hip flexor. And I like to bring my knees outside of my elbows. Just work on that explosiveness, and then at the same time get that little bit of stretch of my psoas and my anterior hip flexor. Like here, extend the hips, stretch out those hip flexors and psoas, and then there's my favorite. This is another exercise to work on the explosiveness. This is what I call a groiner. I'm in that goblet squat position and then keeping the back arched. Always, always, always. Explosively get into that cobra stretch, jump back. Jump into that cobra stretch, stretch, jump back. Again, prying the hips open, and all I'm doing here is trying to get the muscles firing and at the same time just get those hips mobile again. Jump back into the cobra stretch and then jump back into the goblet squat. Again, what I call a groiner. Now, if all else fails, if my hips are just so tight, my back won't release, it's sore, this here is my kind of my secret weapon, my last resort. Proceed with caution when you do this stretch because it's pretty painful. I use the pads there because you're going to want to slide your knees apart and it kind of grinds the skin, into the floor. But get those knees apart as far as you possibly can. Maintain the arch in your low back, tense the low back and tense the lats, and then just try to get those knees as far apart as you can. And then very slowly, and I mean slowly, rock back and forth and try to pry those hips open. As you feel things release, I mean literally your butt will shake, your abs and your low back will burn, but you can feel that low back release. And then as you start to feel that release, just try to push those knees apart. Let them slide out a little bit further. Just like you can see, very subtle there. I just let the knees slide apart. Rock back and forth again. Again, be careful because this is a painful stretch. You can see that look on my face as I'm rocking back and forth, keeping that low back arched. and trying to stretch and pry those hips open and get those things to loosen up so they're not pulling on my spine, my vertebrae, and not pulling on my erector muscles in my low back, just to create that release. When you get out of this stretch, do it very slowly, very gingerly. Bring the knees in, keep the back straight, keep it arched. There's my goblet squat, and then go ahead and get out. So again, that's my mobility work. That's the bread and butter. I don't do them all, with the exception of those first three, but I use them as needed. So again, Brad Loomis, 3D Muscle Journey. Thank you so much for watching.